Oops, sorry, that was on my sewing machine.
Hello,
Hello.
Surzhana. How are you?
I'm very good. And you?
Brilliant, thank you. Are you in Marseille today?
Yes.
Lovely, lovely. Well, I'm very excited to have you on the show. I thought we'd start off. For those that don't know you, we'll give a general introduction. But for those joining today, I'll just give a little bit of a context of this series. So this is the second series of Biofutures. It's all about the body, health and well-being, and a number of the sessions in this series are about apparel, fashion, textiles, and if you like, biomaterials, biodesign, biofabrication, biotechnology. That is, very intimate. It's that which we wear as opposed to our wider surroundings. And I have invited a number of what I think to be the seminal figures in this space to this series. So they are working across a number of different areas. We've had an expert in biofabrication, we've had an expert in biomaterials, and today we're joined by Surzhana Radnaeva, who has a particularly interesting background and is working on some really interesting things. So Surzhana, for the benefit of those that don't know your work, can you give a bit of an introduction as to who you are and how you got involved with the general domain of costume and fashion, and then into sort of working with some biomaterials as well?
Okay. First of all, I wanted to thank you for this invitation. I'm very happy to be part of your session. I present myself as a slow fashion designer, as opposition to fast fashion. So very often people ask, what is slow fashion? Does it mean that I work slow, or what does it mean? And I work with biomaterials. So I'm going to start from introduction of my brand that calls Traditional Futures. It is work on modernization of traditional costumes. I'm going to go deeply a little bit after. And inside this brand, I created a project that calls Materia Bruta, which is work with various biomaterials, such as I worked with kombucha leather. Now preferably it's better to say kombucha material, because leather is usually related to animal leather. Alginate. What else? Agar-agar sequins, some milk-based plastics, amadou mushrooms, and my recent project that I'm working right now is paper. I need to make more of the presentations on that as well. My interest is modernization and preservation of traditional costumes and techniques, not only costumes, with combination of biomaterials. So how did I get to biomaterials? Is I'm from Siberian steppes. First of all, I grew up in the steppes, and I didn't know any city when I was small. The only thing I've seen, it was steppes and ships, and I think that's where the love to the nature and biomaterials came from, because I would work already from my early age with wool. I would be surrounded by the smell of the wool, felting, and so I would notice beauty even in the small wind, like in the very small changes in the nature as well. I don't know if I answered the question.
Yeah, no, that's stunning. And I think the fact that, you grew up on the steppes, the Siberian steppes, you were out in nature, you would have been very much aware of the changes in nature, of the seasons, this expansive beauty. Also, what would I be right in saying, I haven't been to the Siberian steppes, I've read a lot about it, but I've not been there. Would I be right in saying that it is a very raw beauty in the sense that it's a place that is stunningly beautiful, but potentially, you know, could be quite dangerous in that there are, would I be right in saying that there are quite a few dangers around in the natural environment in the Siberian steppes?
I wouldn't say it's dangerous, because like physically dangerous.
Well, as in,
It,
I mean, do you, for example, have any sort of animals that are relatively dangerous there, or you know, sort of the environment? Can the weather be at times harsh, or is it not that sort of place? Is it relatively temperate?
First of all, like in the winter, it's very cold. It would get to minus 35 sometimes. In the summer, it would get into plus 35, like the summer in Marseille, where I live right now. So it's quite, it could be dangerous if you're not ready for that. And not in my time when I was small, but in my grandfather's time, there were wolves, a lot of wolves in the steppes. So still need to be quite prepared, even though the landscape is very flat. We don't have mountains where you could get lost. We don't have forest where you would get lost. So, but when it's a completely empty place, you also need to find your direction. It's like almost like being in the sea.
Yeah, because I imagine if it's very flat, there aren't the sort of the visual landmarks that you might use to navigate. So you'd have to have an awareness, I'm guessing at night, of where the North Star is, the constellations, if there's no artificial lighting, things like this. So you've got to be very in touch with the natural world. I'm sort of picturing your childhood as really growing up in the wildlands and absorbing that information through your culture and through being in that place.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
So it's
it really formed my my vision and my artistic approach to everything, my childhood.
Yeah.
And the steppes.
It's stunning. And the other amazing thing as well, I think, about the steppes is, you know, when we look to the evolution of human culture, it's very much seminal in the development of humankind. It's a place from where a number of innovations came from. And of course, your work is speaking to these ancient traditions, these stunningly beautiful crafts and garments, and you're injecting this new life into them. You're splicing the old with the new. How did that process? How did you come from, if you like, being in Siberia and learning these traditional crafts and how they had been taught? I'm guessing, would it be from one generation to the next, something that people were handing on? New sort of learning the technique. Is that how it worked there?
So I must say that I had a very big chance to experience two completely different lifestyles, to see two completely different worlds, to be completely disconnected from this urban life, and right now living in the super urban place. I used to live also in Moscow and Beijing, like super big cities. So in my culture, it was completely normal, and I wouldn't even say traditional way, but it was normal to teach your kid some hand craftsmanship. My grandmother would make costumes by herself. I have my traditional costumes made by her. I would see how she's making, and I was with my grandfather. I would learn how to rotate ropes, with my great grandmother I would learn how to weave and how to work with wool. Everything was in the daily life. I didn't go somewhere especially to learn. It was so natural and beautiful. Only now I see all of this, how beautiful it was. And so when I moved to the city, it was a big shock for me how everything is fast. I was 6 years old when I moved to the city the first time. Yeah, and And since then, since I moved to the city, I was looking for the steps everywhere. In a way, like I also do some photography. So if you see my photography, there are only horizontal lines. I'm a bit obsessed with horizontal lines.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I would say it was a very natural way to teach your kids from even from grandmother to the small children.
Yeah. So that's incredible, because as you'll know, having spent a great deal of your life in cities and the urbanized world, that way of life has very much been eroded from urban life. It's not so common that a grandparent or grandparents and other elders will pass on these beautiful traditions, these beautiful crafts that have been fine-tuned over centuries. But you were fortunate to have that. And today, that when I look at the aesthetics of your work, for those that don't know your work, you will have seen the poster that promoted this, and that's one of your beautiful designs. And instantly from that, I could see the infusion of the aesthetic of the traditional costumes in the cut and the overall sort of aesthetic. And I hadn't seen anything like that before. You know, completely unique aesthetic. I've seen traditional costumes, and I've seen lots and lots of different works with biomaterials, but your work effortlessly splices these. And so what was the point at which you became interested in biomaterials and these living materials and thought, I'm going to try and apply that to the traditional costumes?
Mm-hmm. So biomaterials is my very big passion. Exactly when did I come to this subject was in 2018. I forgot his name, but there is a Japanese designer who worked on the pollution of the sea in Japan, and he pollution of medusae.
Yeah. Yeah.
How do you call that in English? I forgot. And so
yeah.
he collected them, and he made a biomaterial. Because they had a very big issue over there. Even in Marseille now we have a lot of these creatures. And so he made a biomaterial and he made a bag out of it. And so for me, it really struck me, and I fell in love with this idea of not especially this material, but how the story behind how this problem could turn into something very beautiful. And what I like in biomaterials is kind of it's a live story that is frozen in the that we catch in this physical material. I don't know if I'm really clear. As I really love
capturing the living organism, and then you're putting it through a process which is going to create something that it's not inert in the sense that it's a living material, in that just like in nature it will biodegrade if it's in a particular environment, but you're capturing that living process and integrating into the materials that you create to make your costumes.
Yeah. And also, of course, the sustainable part of it, which is very important in my work. So biomaterial is a very vast term, I might say, because biomaterial could be also leather, it could be paper, cotton, anything. But right now what I am describing is this new biomaterials, sometimes forgotten biomaterials, like for example Amadou mushroom. It's material that in Transylvanian forest they would use to make hats, and it's a disappearing art as well. So for me also in my work is to preserve different traditional biomaterials, like Japanese paper that I'm working with right now is also disappearing art. Not the washi papers that we're used to, but the paper that is made especially to make clothing, because in Japan they used to wear paper clothing before. And so somehow I want to connect all of this in order to preserve traditional craft, I might say, also with biomaterials, but I work with new biomaterials as well. And what I love is the stories behind them, and that it's sustainable, and very often they have alien look.
Yeah, a novel look, something we're not familiar with.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's beautiful. So there are so many different facets, and I think one of the comments that somebody made actually on LinkedIn when I put the poster on there, he made the comment that he couldn't see the connection between the traditional and this subject, biomaterials. But I think that, as you obviously know from your background, certainly when I was looking at this topic in architecture and looking at the indigenous architectures of the world, the indigenous designs of the world, the way of building in the environment, the wild, you know, as well as more generally, it is inert, it is, sorry, not inert, it's innate to the traditional indigenous processes, the ideology of design within these cultures, to work with nature, to design with the seasons, to design with your local materials, and to make the longevity of what you're creating appropriate to the environment. So an example of this would be in California. It's obviously it's been populated for at least 11,000 years, possibly longer. We know that the ancestors of the Native American peoples came from Asia. So they brought their cultures in from Asia, which is interesting because when you look at the fundamentals of their architecture, you can see that link if you know the architectural cultures of Asia. And then you look at what did they build? Well, these peoples in places where the fire was coming frequently, it was coming every single year, and the fire was coming in a way that you could not make architecture resilient to, they would build for their buildings to be burnt or their structures to be burnt. So they'd actually build with reeds and other materials, knowing that the structures would only last the season. They'd get burnt, all of the nutrients would go back into the ground, and then they'd build again. So it was this completely, what we would now call a circular design system. No harm to the environment at all. And of course, the other thing, I mean, this system was so ingenious that if they built something, if they built a structure somewhere and they decided to move on, because of course sometimes they were migrating with their food sources through the seasons, they just set light to it, they just burn it, and it would be gone, and then they could come back and build anew at the beginning of the season. And we see these design cultures in Asia, and it's so good to be seeing somebody bringing back and fusing these indigenous ways of working with natural materials, with local materials, with local skills, through the process you're speaking to, the parent generation, the mother, the father, the grandfather, the grandmother, handing down the skills, handing down the knowledge. One of the things I noticed about the indigenous cultures of California across the Native Americans is the fact that often these skills, these crafts, these design skills, are infused with stories. There is a story, there is a myth, there is a legend. Is that the case with your crafts? Are there stories that are associated, let's say when your grandmother or grandfather were teaching you something, did they speak to these stories and these narratives?
Did your question is, did they speak about the
So if
stories and mythology?
If they were teaching you a skill, did they talk when they were teaching that skill about a story, an ancient story, a tale, a fable, a legend, a myth? Did they ever? Do you remember that? Obviously, you were very, very young, only 6 years old. But can you remember there was storytelling involved? I'm just wondering if that happened in your culture as it did in the Native American cultures.
The storyteller would be more my grandfather. Yes, he would tell stories from ancient times, and also a lot through songs that have been passed through generations, and often we don't even know how old are these songs, because they're very ancient songs. And I started to sing also before I started to speak. It's really also common in our culture to sing. And it was one of my first surprises when I moved to the city, because I would sing all the time, that people don't sing actually. And it's something embarrassing to walk on the streets and to sing. And because if you would go to our villages or in the steppes, maybe now it's been a while that I haven't been in my steppes, but it was completely normal to sing as well. When you work with the wool, when you cook, when you make a cord, when you look after your sheep, it was a way to connect with the world, with other people, with the nature. There would be songs about everything, about your horse, about your sheep, about your love, about everything.
Wow.
And yeah.
That sounds, so are you going to be encouraging that? Because I know one of your visions is that you're basically going to, obviously at the moment you've got this beautiful line of costumes that are splicing the ancient and the modern, and that, you know, really are at the edge. They're in that place. Innovation always comes between two things, and you're right in that space. And I know your big vision is to localize the production, to sort of bring that to the site, which obviously has many, many advantages. You've got sustainability, cutting out the transportation, you've got working with the abundant resources, you've also got employment, you've got ensuring against workforce abuses, because when you have your labor force, when you have the people that are producing your designs around you, you can, you know, check that everything is okay. You know that it's not going to be the case there's something happening far away that you don't want to be happening. In this vision, you know, can you see this other element of, let's say, the people that are making the materials and making your costumes, can you see them also singing? Can you see that element? Would you like them to be doing that?
I would love to, but I'm not sure it's possible.
Not sure it's possible. That might be a step too far.
Yeah.
Oh, I love that idea. It makes me think it would be, because actually in Western culture, there used to be a singing culture with work as well. So for example, in the mining towns, in places like Cornwall, Wales and elsewhere, the miners would sing, and it was partly to make the day go faster. And that's why these places, Cornwall, Wales, they are very famous for their choirs. They're very famous for having really good singers, because singing was integral to working. So, you know, it would just make it that little bit easier than being down a mine in the dark, chipping away for hours. you know, it would make more fun. Thinking about, so you've worked with a number of different biomaterials, experimented with them. Of those that you've so far worked with, what did you think has the sort of biggest possible use in fashion? Do you think that they all could be used about the same, or do you think there are a couple of materials of the ones that you've used that could be more could be used more than others, just because maybe the process was easier?
Mm-hmm. So from all the biomaterials that I worked with, each one had its own specificity, I might say. And like, for example, I'm going to answer directly to the question. Like, the most usable materials for wearability would be paper, from the biomaterials that I work with right now. and Amadou mushroom. Otherwise, like kombucha leather, alginate, agar-agar, these ones, they still have work to need more research on them, and we might need some industrial help as well to make them really commercialized and to really use them. For now, they're ready to be more part of artistic projects. Because, for example, kombucha leather, it's very beautiful, leather-like, alien-like looking, but it's not really predictable. During the time, it gets either it can dry, it can get hard, or it can change color, and the smell is also very specific. It has a very specific smell. Smell of biomaterials is another subject to talk about because
we'll talk about it in a moment.
Because all of them, they have very specific smell. It also could be part of education in a way. All the biomaterials is also a big education part because people need to get used to them. And we forgot often that leather, for example, it also has a smell, which we got used to, and we don't find it weird or disgusting. Maybe for some people it is, but for example, fish skin is also another biomaterial. And all of this, we need to get used to them also. We'll need some education on biomaterials in the future. So the most, the paper and Amadou mushroom, I would say that could be used and commercialized.
Right now, because I noticed in your collection, you obviously have a collection online, and you have a number of pieces. And my impression was you're already selling pieces that are made of the paper. Is that right? It looked like
the paper one is
yeah. And what's your process of making the paper, this traditional paper?
So I might say that some of the biomaterials, I know how to make them by myself. I have made them, but in my work, I prefer to work with the material creators. This way, everybody do their part. And I'm not already, I do a lot, and I prefer to work with professional people that just do one material. For example, paper that I'm working with right now. There are a few Japanese artisans that still make this paper in Japan. So I work with them right now. So it's not very local, I might say, as I'm in Marseille and they make paper in Japan. So what was the question? Sorry.
But yeah, no, and that's really interesting. But I think you've hit on some key points here, because as you say, there are lots of experimental projects around the world around biomaterials, and it has exploded. If I think back, I first conceived of the idea of creating fashion with biomaterials in 1994, so really nearly 30 years ago. And back then, we really had very little idea as to how these new biomaterials might actually work. And it certainly wasn't the case that there were lots of people around the world experimenting. The great thing now is that there are so many workshops, there are so many courses now popping up, as well as YouTube videos and other places you can go to that will tell you, okay, you need to take this ingredient, that ingredient, put them together in this process, and you'll make a biomaterial. So we've got lots of experimentation, which is brilliant. But as you say, from a commercial perspective, the stability of these materials is not yet established. They are very, very variable in quality, and there are a lot of sort of technical problems to work through. And so it strikes me that what we really need to have happen now is that, together with the universities that are researching this, we need bigger firms coming in. We need chemists, we need biochemists, because that's the community that can actually help to develop these materials in a way that you could have industrial scale production, so that designers like you, and not obviously just in fashion, but in interiors, in lots of other areas of design, could buy this stuff knowing, right, it's going to perform as I need it to, in order that I can use it in my garments and not have unhappy customers send the garment back because something happened to it. But it's really interesting also what you said about the smell of these new materials. No one else has mentioned that yet. And so, yeah, that is important, isn't it? Because we do get used to smells, don't we? As you say, we got used to leather, and we, you know, they always say about teenage boys in particular, they don't tidy their bedrooms. And my friends with teenage boys, they go into their bedrooms like this because they really stink, most of them. They smell horrible. But the boys in these messy bedrooms, they can't smell it. They've become, we have a word for it, nose blind. So it proves your point, nose blind. But this point, yes, I mean, about the smell of the biomaterials, that's so important commercially. So that's something we need to kind of add to the tick list, isn't it? We need to add that, because it could actually be, since they're natural, that they are engineered to smell differently slightly. We could maybe infuse them with something that smells beautiful, perfumed maybe, even organic perfumes, so that they don't put you off. So you don't think, oh no, gosh, I can't buy that because it just smells disgusting.
Yeah, exactly.
I think we need to hook you up. You're in Marseille. We need to get in touch with some perfumiers in Grasse, just up the road. And we need to set them the project. Yeah, hybrid project.
Yeah, it's another project I would love to work on.
Yeah, perfume injected biomaterials. Definitely something there.
Like the kombucha, for example, is while you grow it, you can add different things like colors. You can grow it on different kind of tea to change the color, but also you can add some aromatic oils in it. In order, I had a project in collaboration with Threads that calls Reshape. Regrow, and we won a competition, Reshape, in 2018. And so the project was on the kombucha garment, the photo that you shared, and so one of the propositions was to add some aromatic oils inside in order to add some medical properties into it, as aromatherapy, or if you add some tea tree oil, it could also work with maybe as antibacterial. So there are many a lot of hope on kombucha leather, and people continue working with it. Hopefully it's going to be really used one day.
That's really wonderful, actually. And so, yeah, not just adding the scents for the sort of pleasure to make it smell nicer, but as you say, adding tea tree or oils with properties that help kill bacteria, that can also, I mean, actually, I use tea tree if I have a cold. If my nose is blocked, I don't go for olibus oil and the other things. I always go for tea tree because it will clear my sinuses. So, yeah, that sort of feeds into the health, doesn't it? And also, there is a big sort of line now. They've got, I can't remember the name of the store in Canada, but there's a store in Canada where the whole store sells products that are, they're scent products, they're perfumes, they are sort of, various ways that you might inhale the smell. And they tailor these different fragrances to boost your mood, to make you happier, to make you calmer, a whole store of it. And so I'm now picturing, from what you said, garments that are infused with different smells and scents and oils that can either make you feel calm or happy, or these other things. That would just be amazing.
Yeah.
And sort of thinking about, you've already created sort of some really beautiful works. Thinking to the next couple of years, what are the things that you would really love to do with your collection? collections? What are the sort of things you'd really love to work on if you were given a chance?
So right now I work with the first traditional costume is Buret costume, my own from my minority, but the idea and the goal is not to only work on my traditional costume, but to continue and to modernize some other traditional costumes. So my next step would be Sami traditional costume that is in Norway, Finland, Sweden, and in Russia as well. Because I went to a few times already, 3 times or 4 times. There is a festival, Ridu Ridu, in Norway. It is a Sami culture festival, and they invited me as an artist, and as I made a tea ceremony in the yurt, and the Buret tea ceremony. And also I went with my traditional futures brand there to expose. So that's my first, or my next modernization of the traditional costumes, I hope. And of course to work with biomaterials, and really to my big interest is to really have products that can commercialize, that are made from biomaterials, not to just give a hope and to only exhibit them in the exhibitions. This is really my big goal, to commercialize, because that's the only way we can really change the fashion world, by seeing it as in the crowd, these biomaterials, not just in the exhibition. Like our traditional costumes, they nowadays ended up being behind the glass in the museums. And for me, it's very sad. I need to see all of this here, like in the street, in the world, in order to have a bright future, as we say.
Absolutely. And I think, you know, your work, it's important on so many levels. First of all, you have that reinvention of these traditional crafts and costumes. That's important in itself. Secondly, there's the fact that you are of the culture of your first, you know, collection. You are not somebody that has appropriated this culture. It is a culture of which you are indigenous. You're now looking to work with others, with other indigenous peoples. That is a different approach, and it's I think an immensely better approach than some others are taking, because what we have seen with the indigenous cultures is, number one, in the first instance, a massive underrepresentation. If you're trying to buy books about indigenous costumes, architectures, etc., in English, which, if we bear in mind, it's the language of science, it's the principal language of technology and of design, it's practically impossible. It's really hard. There are so many different cultures that I'd love to learn about and I'd love to get books on, but they just don't exist, because at the moment publishers are not recognizing that there is, you know, that there's a lot to learn. There's a lot that is worth writing about, that's worth commissioning about. So there's an absence of books generally, but where there are books, a number of them don't go to the indigenous community or representatives of those. Instead, what they do is they write about their cultures. They might go and visit, take some photographs, and then they write about it second hand, and then they commodify that. And I see that not so much as a form of appropriation, but I do think that that is problematic, because it's taking cultures that have been evolved over millennia, and it's making money out of it, and it's not doing so in a way that is going to involve those peoples, give them ownership, engage them, and I think that is, you know, that is a problem. So you're doing the opposite of that, because you are actually working with the peoples of the cultures, and that makes the most sense, because at the end of the day, it's you and your community that really know the technicalities of what you create. You know these crafts in and out. That gives you the innate ability to feel a fabric, to see a new possible component to the crafts in some way, and to know, yeah, that will work, because that is exactly the kind of, you know, that's very similar to the existing fabric, or that has the properties of what is needed to create this craft to the best of its you know, possibility. Whereas when others do that, when they don't have that training, that knowledge, that innate understanding, I think it's problematic. So I'm really glad to see that you are doing this, because you are one of very, very few people in fashion at all, let alone, you know, with biomaterials. And then there's the fact that you know, the capacity for what your vision is limitless, because there are so many cultures, indigenous cultures, vernacular cultures all over the world, with all this richness of knowledge, all these amazing things that they can bring to the fore. So I think it's incredibly exciting what you're doing. How much support have you found that you have had? Obviously, I know you've won the award that you spoke to. You've been involved in some great events. Do you feel that, you know, you are well supported? Is interest coming in as it should be?
There is interest, but still I need to look for it through, like, for example, these indigenous festivals that support this kind of projects. Also, like on the Japanese paper, for example, it is traditional also craftsmanship. There is some support through connections between France and Japan. So need to really find it. I don't feel like I go outside and I'm all supported, but I need to look for this kind of support. There is interest for sure, but in order to be really widely supported, I think also the people need to be interested in this kind of clothing, in the traditional clothing, who would be ready to wear them as well. So that's also another big subject. Yeah, but you said you were really right saying about the preservation of the traditional culture that often is misinterpreted by people, and how often the border is very thin on using somebody's culture and making it not right. For me, it's very important to keep the big respect and knowledge of the tradition, and still to modernize, because modernization is how to say, like, for example, the traditional costumes have been always changing before when people were wearing them. If you would see through the centuries, the costume would always change. For example, our traditional costume, when at my great-great-grandparents' times, it used to be made from leather, because leather was much cheaper than cotton, for example. But nowadays, everything turned. Now, leather is more expensive than cotton. But in our culture, in Buryatia, it was this way. So, yeah.
You know, that's really interesting as well, because that shows the innate logic in what you're doing. Because obviously, yeah, leather became a less sensible choice. So then the transition to cotton. Obviously, today, cotton is problematic because it's a very water intense plant to grow. So that's obviously why we've seen a whole sea dried up, because the cotton plantations so excessively drained water from the rivers that were feeding the sea. So cotton has some big sustainability issues. There is a very big narrative in fashion around moving away from cotton and towards plants like bamboo, which obviously fast growing, not requiring of such intensity with respect to watering. And now you're looking at not one, but you're looking at several possibilities for biomaterials. And I think, you know, isn't this exciting? Because, you know, that again, that is offering up as possible solution to the cotton problem. Another sort of material that is in sort of development is, you know, synthetic silk and ways of growing silk that are not traditional, and possibly even sort of extracting some of the sort of genetics and growing it without the silkworms and all the ethics issues there. What are your thoughts on this sort of bio silks?
I need to think about it a little bit. I'm not against it completely. I'm not against against this idea. Now there are so many different biomaterials. There are even spider-made materials. So we could say that is it really also I forgot the proper word, like that we use animals again to make materials. So all of this, it has so many contradicted thoughts. So that could talk and talk and talk about it. Yeah. But synthetic silk, I'm not against it. As there are even synthetic meats that some people are creating as well to not harm animals. There is, so I think it's all of this can be very good and at some point be very bad. Suddenly it can turn to something bad. So need to have
an area of
balance. Think about balance.
Yeah,
I think.
So more research. We need more research to establish what the possible advantages, the plus sides might be, and what the negative, the not so good things would be. I think that sounds a very sensible approach because, you know, certainly it's interesting to think about the possibility of creating structures in the way at MIT. Neri Oxman, when she was there, you know, she created a pavilion, an architectural structure where the structure was put in this sort of engineering component, if you like, and then they set the silkworms to work. They just sort of let them weave the fabric of this pavilion. But obviously the problem with animals of any kind is that they can escape, and then you get invasive species. You get creatures that get out of the lab, they get out of the production unit, and then they can cause chaos in the landscape. And that traditionally with agriculture, for example, there's an Asian ladybird species of beetle that was introduced to European farming because it ate, you know, it was a very good pest controller. But then they realized, well, then they escaped. Now they have become so populated that there's no way of containing this invasive species. They have naturalized, they've become indigenous, native to the environment, but they harm the native ladybird species. They harm the other beetle species that were there before they were. So I think, as you say, I can see that there's lots of possible problems with working with animals in biomaterials, but when you're in a situation working with the sort of things you're working with, you're taking sometimes living organisms, but you're not taking living organisms that necessarily have the ability to then escape the lab and cause chaos. They can be contained, and the process can be regulated. It can be kept under control, which is important. We're nearly at time now. So thinking ahead, I want you to think ahead. If you could have just one wish for the future, relating to the things that you're working on, what would your wish be?
A wish that concerning my work.
I mean, concerning your work, how your traditional futures might develop, or it could be for the whole industry, it could be for the whole of fashion. It's your wish, what's your wish? It can be anything.
Um, I wish for the whole fashion industry to be regularized and
Regulated
balanced,
and balanced
regulated, I'm sorry, and balanced.
and balanced.
Not first of all for my brand and for all other brands, because I've been thinking as maybe I am unfortunate to be part of fashion industry, but as I'm already a fashion designer, I need to do with what I have. So I'm gonna do my best to not at least harm the planet and maybe do even good if I can.
Yeah, so
So
that's your wish. That sounds a good wish to me. And the second question I have for you is, the year is 2050. So we are the middle of the century. What do you see for the future of fashion? How do you see the things that you're working with changing the industry by 2050?
mhm. Um, so I see people's clothing. I think it's would be good if it's mono clothing like it used to be before. People would have only two clothes, one for working, one for weekends. So it must be a very good quality of the clothes. That might be changing as well. The color with different pigments that change the color depending on anything, the weather or the mood, or maybe the costume would uh, heat if it's cold, or is I've been also part of the, I don't know if you heard, Fabric Academy. It's a textile academy that teaches about biofabrication and new technology. So I've learned a lot. I'm very grateful for this course. And so it's actually endless, the possibilities we have now that working with textile, we can make anything. The textiles that moves, that change the colors, that makes the heat. So I see still somehow the biomaterials could be combined with new technology in a smart way and in a balanced way, again, I might say. But yes, I see a mono clothing that change somehow and that we keep for a long time, maybe for the whole life, and then
Brilliant
we'll pass to
vision. I
the
love
next
that.
generation.
I'm thinking of an octopus or a squid, and the way that their bodies change color to send out various messages about what they're thinking and what they're feeling. So I'm picturing your future collection 2050, the workwear, the restwear, maybe some nightwear. It's going to have change. It's going to be responsive to the environment, to the mood. The textiles are going to be, really smart. It's going to smell amazing because these are going to be biotextiles. It's going to be infused with properties that help your health, that boost your mood, and that is going to be made locally. And it's going to fuse these ancient crafts with the state of the art in technology and material science. So I think that's one of the most inspiring visions I have heard to date. I love the idea of this sort of minimalist wardrobe where it's no more excessive consumption, millions of pairs of shoes, and it being some status symbol to wear a different dress to every event. No, this is one outfit that can look like 20, 100 different outfits because it's got this amazing smart material. So I think that's a really beautiful vision. And I can hear your your baby in the background. So I know we're bang on time now. I'm not going to hold mummy up. But it's been a real pleasure to speak with you and hear your thoughts and your ideas. And I wish you the best of luck, and we will keep in touch, because if I hear of any opportunities that I think would be good for you, they'll be coming on through. Thank you for everybody, to everybody joining us. Thank you for joining us. We will be back with Carol Collette, the professor she's a professor of a number of things over at Central St Martin's. She's a veritable powerhouse of inspiration. She'll be joining us on the 17th of May. On the 18th of May, we will have Piero D'Angelo, who is another fashion designer, also working with biomaterials, another fantastic creative. So we'll be back then. But yeah, thank you again, Surzhana. It's been such a pleasure.
Thank you so much, Melissa. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.